Tonight, a new book called Don't Be Canada. We'll have a feature interview with its author, Tristin Hopper. It's May 19th, and this is the Ezra Levant Show.
Shame on you, you censorious thug.
Ever since October 7th, 2023, when the Hamas terrorists blitzed and blazed their way into southern Israel, killing thousands and kidnapping hundreds, I've seen, I suppose, a radicalization of some people in Canada who I think before then would have thought that Canada was pretty much okay. That sure, we had some problems around the edges, but generally the country was hanging together pretty well. But I think what happened in our streets after that, the constant celebration and promotion of terrorism, the out-and-out anti-Semitism, and the contradiction between that and what Canada always held itself out to be. Trigger warnings, human rights oriented, taking into account feelings and minorities. I think the contradiction between what we saw in our own streets and what we thought we were as a country became too much. And I want to interview a reporter columnist who I think has become radicalized, not in a bad way. I don't mean radicalized like a terrorist might be radicalized, but radicalized as in going to the root of things. That's where the word radical comes from. That faced with the shocking sights and sounds of our country and starting to look at the national myths we tell about ourselves, I think that he has transformed himself. His name is Tristan Hopper, and he's the author of Don't Be Canada, How One Country Did Everything Wrong All at Once. And he joins me now via Zoom from Victoria, BC. Tristan, would you disagree with how I've characterized you? Would you disagree with that I have sensed a transformation in you in the last year and a half, or was I just not paying attention before?
No, I mean, that's why I'm here. I would clearly say pre-October 7th, 2023, if your show had called, I'd be like, well, I shouldn't talk to controversial or right-wing provocateur Ezra Levant. I should just speak to the mainstream media. So yeah, that's definitely changed since then. As you mentioned, the sort of post-October 7th moral clarity that's I saw large portions of the media and institutions not accept. It's taken me for a roller coaster ride, as I'm sure it has for you.
It has. I feel like so many of my views, which were regarded as outliers before, have been vindicated, and I'm very unhappy about it. I think the absolute worst words ever to say are "I told you so." I hate saying "I told you so."
I strongly wish you had been more wrong, and we could look at you as being more crazy. I used to, I wish I could make posters that said Ezra was wrong. I wish Mark Stein was more wrong. Lots of people, including myself, I wish were wrong. Oh, I wish I was wrong.
It's not just October 7th, but I think that has exposed some of the most fundamental lies we tell ourselves. But your book, I presume, I haven't read it yet. I have read your columns and your other reports in the National Post. They talk about much more than just October 7th.
Stephen Gill talk about October 7th at all. I didn't even have time to get to that.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw a smattering of issues at you. Just in the headlines of your recent columns, the extremely bad housing record of Canada's new housing minister, talking about Gregor Robertson. Stephen Guilbeault is now back in charge of controlling the internet. Mark Carney's whiplash-inducing turn on Trump. Immigrants deny Carney his majority. These are radical ideas. Is Canada salvageable? I mean, you say don't be Canada.
I don't think I'm too radical. So I think I've always sort of occupied the middle. Obviously, this recent election would seem to just discount that. But I'd say most of these issues that people say are controversial, like, oh, you're the guy writing about gender identity in schools, you're the guy writing about these particular issues. I'm generally cowardly when it comes to these issues. I'm only touching issues in which I have a pretty good sense that when it's specifically put to the Canadian electorate, it's at least 50% agree with me. But anyway, you're right in that these ideas are very rarely seen in any kind of mainstream context.
Mickey House would talk about what he called the under news, which is things that happen beneath what the legacy media would talk about. Maybe it's people whispered things or said things only to a trusted group of friends. Immigration has always been part of the under news. I think moms talking about transgender athletes pushing their girls around on the rugby field, that's the under news. I think that...
Yeah, it's what everybody calls me about, because, I'm in Victoria. So when everybody whenever people here have some dark right-wing thought in the middle of the night, they always call me their National Post friend. So I have a very warped perception. They seem like good liberals, the rest of the time, but I know, where it's sort of like, if you're gay, you kind of know everybody's gay thought because they always come out to you. Very similar for me, but with conservative ideas.
Well, it's a case where the emperor has no clothes, I think. Everyone says... let's talk about immigration. It's very tough to do so. And it's starting to change in certain parts of the world. Just in the last week, Keir Starmer in the United Kingdom, the Labour Prime Minister, has come out very butch, cutting numbers and ordering them to speak better English. And I think it's because he had a near-death experience in some recent elections. But until he sort of gave people permission to talk about immigration, it was sort of a marker. If you spoke out, you were far right, which is how they say alt-right over there. I think that a lot of these things, everyone sort of senses that things are going crazy, but everyone's afraid to speak out. They'll be canceled. They'll be smashed down. Is it still that way in Canada on issues like immigration?
One thing, one sort of theme that comes up in this book is how often the groups that are loudest and most opposed to a lot of these, so-called woke issues are usually from the demographics you would least expect. So I found when it comes to the issue of gender identity, I can generally see we've gone in an extreme location. But when you find the most radical voices, the people who are most opposed to this, I've often found are from the gay community because they're saying, well, I was uncomfortable in my body when I was growing up, as most teenagers are, but particularly gay teenagers. And in the context of what I'm seeing now, I would be told that I belong to a different sex, and I would have been, taken down this road of puberty blockers and potential surgical implications. So there's very much a personal connection to this. Similarly, on immigration, when I receive an email from a conspicuously Indian name, most of the time it's someone going off about the immigration rules because old stock Canadians, whatever, I'm fifth generation white people here. You're not as directly affected by it. But if you have come into Canada it's very hard to get into Canada. You came in on a points-based system. You took all of these things about shared value and integration very seriously. That's how you raised your family. You spoke English in the home. And then to see those rules change very dramatically within the last few years, you're pissed off not only because it's a portrayal of everything you worked for, but you came to Canada because you wanted to get away from, the chaos and, internecine conflict that is present across a lot of the world. So you're sort of pissed off. It's a much more direct issue for your recent immigrant than, say, anyone else. So that sort of comes up throughout the book. On crime, any number of crime reforms were brought in as, this is helping the Indigenous community. I mean, there's many voices in my book from Indigenous people saying, no, we would actually prefer it if you took dangerous people and kept them in jail instead of having them stab us would be preferred.
Yeah, I mean, I know that and I hate to say it, but I think it's generally true with a lot of murder, is the victim often knows the perpetrator. They often have a romantic relationship with them. I mean, sometimes men kill women who they know, their wives, their girlfriends, even family members. And that is how it is in large part with the Indigenous community. When you have missing and murdered Indigenous women, the RCMP statistics will tell you it's other Indians.
That's stats across the world. If someone's going to kill me, probably going to be a white guy with a beard. U.S. statistics, Canadian crime statistics. There's very little intra-racial conflict. It's mostly interracial murder. So we usually kill people who look like us, which I guess is good.
I'm sort of chuckling at the way you described a white guy with a beard, but you can't really turn that into a if your solution is, well, we will not convict or jail the perpetrators, you're just putting them right back in the community. Like you may feel in that moment, a white judge might feel in that moment that he's being very kind, that he's doing what Kipling said, pick up the white man's burden. He's being very kind to these indigenous people, but actually he's putting the perpetrator back amongst the vulnerable. But it's all about the elites feeling good about themselves. I think they're often insulated from the results of their own decisions.
Yeah. I think it's sometimes shocking how on the ground reactions, among so-called marginalized communities, are often completely at odds with how their interests are being represented at an elite level. And criminal justice being a great example. I think it would be very hard to find someone who grew up on a reserve, who has grown up poor, who has been homeless, who doesn't agree with just the basic premise that sometimes you get someone who is so dangerous that they cannot be reformed and just has to be kept away from people. And that kind of idea essentially does not exist within the Canadian criminal justice system. There is no procedure by which we just decide, there's nothing we can do about this person. Let's just put them away where they can't hurt anybody. Very rare instances, if there's public scrutiny, maybe Paul Bernardo won't get out, but even he's not a guarantee.
Oh, hi, it's Ezra Levant here in Toronto with an important message because we need your help. Independent journalism in Canada is under attack. Government censors, big tech deplatformers, and the dying legacy media are all working together to maintain exclusive control on the information you receive. They don't want you to hear other voices like ours, and they really don't want you to be informed and to think for yourself. That's why the work we do here at Rebel News is so important. Our on-the-ground reporting, independent news shows, and special content you won't find anywhere else. It's all designed to give you trustworthy information and alternative viewpoints so you can decide for yourself. We don't get government money, and we are not owned by some big global conglomerate. We're funded by people just like you, so please support independent journalism and help us continue our work by subscribing and becoming a Rebel News Plus member today, right here on the page. Go to rebelnewsplus.com. Members get instant access to all of our shows, invitations to exclusive events, and access to our premium content like live event footage and documentaries you won't see anywhere else. Only Rebel News Plus members can join the conversation by participating in the comments section of our new website. That way you can have your say too. More than anything, though, you'll be able to take pride in supporting real, honest journalism, and you'll help our talented team continue to do the work to push back on the establishment. We really can use your help. We need it, in fact. So thank you, and enjoy Rebel News Plus. I'm older than you, so I know two people who personally attended Indian residential schools. And both of them say it was the best thing that ever happened to them. One guy, I'm not going to say his name, is a senior lawyer in Edmonton, whose son is now a successful lawyer. And he said to me, point blank, it would never have even been within the realm of possibility that he could become a lawyer had he not gone to this residential school. I'm not denying that there were abuses. There were abuses in every residential school for white kids. There's, fancy British boarding schools every school has their scandals. But the only two people I know who went to Indian residential schools both liked it. And one of them said at family reunions, I asked him about it. His family said everyone in his family was the same way. And I don't think you're even allowed to say that now. You're called a denialist.
Well, it's interesting, and this also comes up in the book because I mentioned there's one chapter I sort of draw a distinction between two sort of Crown reports, and the first one is the Truth and Reconciliation final report. And you say you're not allowed to say it. I mean, most of the report, the reason it was written is because these were assimilation of schools, a legacy. They're generally seen as having shattered Indigenous communities, but it does address. It says, there were teachers that were doing their best. They were doing their best within the system they thought was correct, and there are students. I mean, those testimonies are in there of like your friends saying, actually, my personal perception of these schools was generally positive. I understand that wasn't the norm. What I do in the book is I contrast that with that's sort of a nuanced take on a complex issue. We were able to hold a Crown inquiry and actually describe something, do original research. Where were these schools? What was their goal? What was the death rate? What were children dying from? What was their death rate as compared to the general populace? These are very information dense and easy to read. Now, contrast that with the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Inquiry, which just came afterwards. That is just complete academic jargon, impossible to read, no original research, no attempt to actually find out who is murdering Indigenous women, under which circumstances, and how that can be prevented. Most of it is this wacky chapter that goes off about how, technically Canada can be called guilty of an ongoing genocide. So at the end of this, I'm just like, millions of dollars went into this report. And it just sort of illustrates, the difference between those, illustrates how very quickly Canadian institutions sort of signed on to so-called anti-racism, anti-colonialism ideas, and the damage that does, because you can have a very useful piece of scholarship to absolutely nothing that accomplishes nothing within the course of a few years.
We're talking about Don't Be Canada, how one country did everything wrong all at once. It's a new book by Tristan Hopper, who's a reporter and a columnist at the National Post. Now, I note that your publisher is Sutherland House, and they've been around, I'm going to guess, for about a decade. That's Ken White, who's the boss of that. He's got an outstanding pedigree in journalism. He was the editor of Maclean's. He was the founding editor of the National Post. He was with the old magazine Saturday Night, which was a famous magazine for decades. So he has a lot of history and credibility, knows a lot of people in the industry, but his publishing house, Sutherland House, is also known for taking more conservative type books. Our friend Andrew Lawton published his book on the trucker convoy through Sutherland House. My question for you, so it's a very reputable publishing house for sure, and Ken is as good as they get, but it's not Random House, it's not the big boys. And I want to ask you, do you think this book, with your alternative or dissident point of view, would have been published by a more mainstream book publisher? I mean, even your columns.
My inclination is no, but I should mention I didn't try.
Okay.
So I wish I could tell you some long story of like Random House told me to take my far right trucker views and get out, but that didn't happen. I called Ken White and he told me to write a book, and that was good because I'm very lazy and I didn't have to shop it around very much.
Well, let me ask you another way to test that question, which is, since this book has debuted, have you had interest? I mean, I think you've got a funny and unusual style. It's an interesting style. The National Post is fairly mainstream. It's I think it's regarded as center right, but it's with the biggest newspaper company in the country. So you're not in the margins. You're not like alternative media like Rebel News. Have you had any reviews, any interviews by, let's say, the CBC? Have they talked to you about your book?
No, I haven't. I don't know if that's an issue of, we have a publicist who's working. I assume she's reached out to all these agencies, but yeah, I haven't received anything like that. So yeah, this media tour has mostly been, so-called conservative media, or sort of, intellectual dark web. And my dad was bringing this up the other day. He's not as sort of plugged into politics as me. And he's like, I read your book, son, and it's particularly conservative, and these seem like issues that your average progressive would want to deal with, and you didn't make it all snooty and conservative and hard to read and inaccessible. So he's like, the CBC should be covering this. So that's his particular view, but I would agree. I don't think there's anything. I mean, you could call me from Jacobin or the Tyee, and we can talk about the parts of the book that are least controversial for your particular audience. It's probably going to be on assisted suicide, but I would say this book has been picked up mostly by conservative media, and I would argue it doesn't need to be.
I mean, the title is deliberately provocative, Don't Be Canada. And it's sort of funny, and even the cover is a little bit humorous. And that is spot on with the mandate of the CBC, to talk about Canada and Canadian things. And even if it's just to have an argy-bargy, a back and forth, to have a debate, to have a bit of a squabble with you. I mean, I think that would be newsworthy. I mean, they don't have to agree with it. But I think the age we're in, I don't know if you were probably just a tadpole when this happened, but Tristan, about 25 years ago, there was a TV show that the CBC hosted called Face Off, which is a great name for a Canadian show because it's got the hockey theme. And you had a permanent guest on the left, Judy Rebick, who was the head of the feminist movement at the time. You had a permanent guest on the right, Claire Hoy, who was a conservative columnist. And every show they would bring in one liberal and one conservative to debate the issues of the week. And so they really actually had to work hard to get conservatives on the show. And I mean, back then I was in law school, I think, and whenever I would come to Toronto, they would have me on for sure because I was from the West and conservative, and they were sort of desperate for this parody. That my point is, the nature of the show had embedded within it a requirement for balance. Right? You can't have a 2 versus 2 debate if you can't find the other conservative. It was sort of like
it's also more compelling television, because when All in the Family came out, when All in the Family came out, they thought, everybody's going to hate Archie Bunker because he's this right-wing nut, and the audience was like, actually, I like Archie Bunker more than I like the other particular characters. So it's anyway. To your point, you're getting. I guess the point you're going to make is this doesn't exist on the CBC anymore.
Well, or anywhere. I mean, it used to be that you debated people you didn't like, and if you declined to debate, it was sort of you were resigning and saying, well, you weren't willing to put in the effort of democracy. But I think now the idea of a face-off show would be impossible on the CBC, and because they have editorial policies. For example, they simply refuse to interview people who are skeptics on the theory of man-made global warming. I'm just picking one example out of the blue. I don't think it would work, and frankly, I don't know if you would get liberal guests to attend because some of them have a policy of not engaging. We do not platform with people with different views. I think that one of the reasons not to be Canada is that we don't allow wide-ranging debates anymore, and censorship is becoming more and more the norm.
I'd agree with that to a certain point, because I was trying to think of a unifying theory at the end of all this, because each of the chapters of the book, it only got a chapter if it was something that was uniquely bad in Canada. So this isn't just a generalized, our debt's too high, our military readiness is not good, because those are things that a lot of the Western world kind of sucks at right now. So I only give it a chapter if it's something that's uniquely bad to Canada, in which even, you take your wussiest corner of Europe, even they think it's kind of nuts for us. But my unifying theory as to why this is happening and why this is so unique to Canada and why so many things went wrong all at once is my general conclusion that Canada is disproportionately filled with people who, for one reason or another, just do not have realistic grasp of what is happening in their own country. A good example, if you know a cop, ask a cop how often they'll arrest someone, and the suspect will ask to have their rights read, that's the Miranda rights. They've seen it on TV. It exists in the U.S. That is not Canadian law. And that extends to all manner of things. We just assume that we have the world's greatest healthcare system. We assume that if you are guilty of first-degree murder, you are punished appropriately and you will be put away and we don't have to think about you. And there's all of these sort of assumptions that just aren't true. And, liberal, conservative, I can tell someone directly on these specific issues what is happening, and they'll agree with me in the moment. But it's very hard to snap people out of this idea that they live in a country where so much is broken. We have been a generally well-functioning country for living memory. For the last 50 years, Canada has been pretty well managed, pretty low corruption. We've been doing things quite well. So when that starts to take a dip, it's really hard to snap Canadians out of the idea that, no, everything you thought about the country is now the opposite of that thing.
One of his last interviews, Justin Trudeau went on a late night show in the States. I think it was Jon Stewart. I can't recall for sure. But the question I do recall, and it was, you've been prime minister for a while, how would you define Canada? What is, you would think Trudeau would have a good answer for that. He's been PM for almost 10 years. And his answer was, well, we're not American. And it sounded slightly aggressive, and well, we're not like you. We're not you. But we hear that. And what makes Canada Canadian? Well, we're not American. We're defined in contradistinction to American. And I understand some of that's for historic reasons. After the U.S. Revolutionary War, those who were on the side of the king came north. They were called loyalists. I get it. But I worry And I saw this in the last campaign where the Liberals really strip-mined anti-Americanism to their benefit. They won the election, not just on anti-Trumpism, but I think on anti-Americanism. And I got to think, and I got to hope that our country is more than that. When you say don't be Canada, well, what are the main maladies? Is anti-Americanism part of it? If America does it, we have to do the opposite.
Yeah, maybe we've taken that to an extreme extent. I think he is historically accurate in that sense. I mean, if you just look at sort of the early decades of Canada, I recently wrote about what Trump calls the artificial line, the 49th parallel. And yeah, it is an artificial line. And the only reason it exists is because we created a country in sort of direct opposition to the United States. We probably wouldn't have gotten around to it, but we knew there was a very heavily armed expansionist country just forming south of us. And if we weren't real quick with it, building a railway, getting immigrants into Alberta to make it look full, forming the RCMP to, have someone showing the flag, the Canada as we know it probably wouldn't exist. So I think it's fair to say that, yes, a lot of our national character is formed to be an alternative to the United States. So we're the Pepsi to their Coke, if you will. But in terms of don't be Canada, I think the general sense is don't become complacent that we are a special country and that bad things don't happen. So I think it's this generalized sense. We just think we're Canadians. Corruption doesn't happen here. Everybody gets along. We do not have internecine conflict. Immigrants come here and they, naturally integrate and they're grateful to be here. And everybody born as a Canadian, has endless runway to increase their prosperity and their standard of living. Basically, all of those things are less true now than they were 10 years ago. And it's hard for us to get out of that headspace that is happening.
The book is called Don't Be Canada. The author is Tristan Hopper. His day job is a reporter and columnist with the National Post, and he wrote this book for Sutherland House Publishing. I haven't read it yet. I want to disclose that, but I'm going to read it. I'm going to buy it. Can I get it on Amazon? Yes,
you can get it on Amazon, and I'm just about to finish the audiobook, if you don't like reading like me.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're doing that. Let me ask you one last question, and thanks very much for your time, by the way. I appreciate you taking so much time with us. You're saying don't be Canada, but we're here. I mean, we were born here. We're stuck here. Some people can leave, but I don't feel like leaving. There's nowhere else that feels like home to me. Even during the COVID pandemic, I saw people go to Florida, which was the free place. And I mean, people who can move, people who work on a laptop, lawyers, accountants, a lot of them went down to Florida. I feel like I would be homeless or I would be alienated if I were anywhere else. So for people who can't skedaddle or won't skedaddle, if we don't want to be the Canada that we become, do you have any advice? Are there any prescriptions you make in your book?
Yeah, that's why I wrote this book. I didn't write "Don't be Belgium." I don't care what Belgium does. I have very low expectations for them to do things correctly. So yeah, I wrote this book because I have to live here for another 50 years. I've got young kids. I would also like them to continue living here. I checked with Northern England. I'm not allowed to make Aaliyah back there. I'm stuck here. I have nowhere else to go. So yes, this is a giant ship called Canada. I would like people to stop drilling holes in the hull because I'm trying to raise my family here. So you get at why I wrote this book versus what I probably would have written otherwise, which is just some dumb history book about some esoteric topic.
Well, listen, I'm really grateful to you. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate that. And congratulations to Ken White and Sutherland House for publishing it. I
also congratulate them for hiring me.
Well, I know you made light of it, and if you had a connection there, it would make sense to go straight to him. But I put it to you that a book that describes the things that you've been talking about here would have a tough time being published today. And I don't know what your publicist has been doing, but it is striking that in a country where there are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of CBC radio and TV and digital shows that would, you're funny, these are controversial, the title, it's Canadian content, that not one of them has spoken to you. I don't want to make you feel bad, but I think it's a sign that they continue to turn a blind eye to things that they don't want to talk about, and that is not. I also keep
calling them full of anti-Semites, so they could. I could understand why they would be upset with me.
Well, they are the public broadcaster. That's what they say. I say state broadcaster. I would think that even if it was just to attack the book, Has it been reviewed anywhere yet?
Oh yes, it's picked up by the Washington Examiner. You know, a few Substacks here and there, a few podcasts. So it has been reviewed. Yes, glowingly.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I look forward to tucking into it myself. Thanks for your time. Our viewers can follow you in the National Post, where you write almost every day, I think. And, of course, the book is for sale on Amazon. Tristan Hopper, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.
All right, well, there you have it. Until tomorrow, on behalf of all of us here at Rebel World Headquarters, to you at home, good night, and keep fighting for freedom.